sites where important events took place. For example, if you go down to Point Lookout at the confluence of the Potomac River with the Chesapeake Bay, that was an outlook station where we had people who were assigned to look for British shipping that was going up and down the bay, and a courier service that went all the way to Washington, D.C. to keep our president and the people there notified as to what was going on. Historic routes. How could you have a better historic route than the one that begins in southern Maryland, which is the British invasion route to Washington, D.C. Monuments, memorials, and statues. That one is also highlighted because I am not aware of any monument, memorial, or statue in southern Maryland that's related to the War of 1812. That may change soon, and Don Shomette will talk about that. Museums which have pertinent collections and displays. You already saw some of the collections here at Calvert Marine Museum. At lunch, you're going to hear more about some displays that already exist and some new exhibits that will be taking place at Jefferson Patterson Park Museum, and hopefully there will be others. Homes and grave sites of individuals associated with the war. Before I go any further, I do want to explain to you what is the difference between a battle and a skirmish. And I can tell you that there is no definitive answer to that. But the American Battlefield Protection Program unofficially states that a battle is when you have 100 or more persons on each side that engage one another. So I'm using that definition when we talk about a battlefield. So a skirmish is a conflict where you have less than 100 people on each side. A battlefield is when you have 100 or more. I know you cannot see the individual points on this map. The only reason that I've shown it to you is that I would like for you to squint and look at where you can see the diamonds, the solid circles, the open circles, and you might even be able to see some X's. There's a couple way up and through there. These represent battles, skirmishes, raids, and riots or brawls that took place in the state of Maryland. And if you look at where the concentration of them are, it's just exactly what Bill has already talked about. It's concentrated in the tidewater of the Chesapeake. And that's a given because the British were using the tidewater as their avenue of access to all of these different resources, where they then either had battle skirmishes or raids. But if you look in detail inside of that circle, and you see where the greatest concentration is located, it's right along the Tucson River. It's in southern Maryland. There's the greatest concentration of raids and skirmishes in southern Maryland than any other place in the state of Maryland. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of these. This is a map that shows southern Maryland, and for the sake of today, I'm only including Charles County, Calvert County, and St. Mary's County. Many of us that live down here, we also consider at least southern Prince George's County, if not all of Prince George's County, as part of southern Maryland. But I'm ignoring that, and the reason I'm doing it is because the next meeting will be held in Bladensburg in Prince George's County. So when I talk about the statistics and the sites, I'm concentrating on the 3 southern counties. All of those squares that you see represent historical resources related to the War of 1812. This is more than just raids, this is more than just skirmishes and battles. These are graves, these are historic sites, etc., etc., etc. But look at the wealth of sites that we have here in southern Maryland. Just to give you an example of some of the graves, on the left-hand side you can see a gravestone to George Dent. And on his tombstone it says Captain Revolutionary War, Colonel, War of 1812. You don't see that very often on gravestones. This is at St. Andrew's Church, which many of you may know, which is less than 10 miles from where we are right now in St. Mary's County. On the upper right-hand side, you probably can't read it very well, but it says Captain John Beckett, a Calvert County who died near Dares Beach, not too far from Prince Gregory. Many of you came through on your way down here this morning. And that's a gentleman who helped carry off the mortally wounded officer known as Zebulon Pike off of the battlefield at the Battle of York, which is now known as Toronto. It was then the capital of Upper Canada. Pikesville is named after Zebulon. Pikes Peak is named after Zebulon. So here is a very well-known individual, and here's a gentleman that fought with him. Bryantown. I'm showing you this because you've got two illustrations of gravestones that clearly show that they were in the Maryland Militia, War of 1812. But interestingly enough, this is also the site, supposedly, of a raid that took place in the summer of 1814, but we don't even have the date. These are the kinds of problems that we run into, where we need to do more research. Exhibits. Already talked about the exhibit that you've seen here, and some of the exhibits that you will see this afternoon, and hopefully more exhibits that we'll have before the Bicentennial. Battles. I don't need to talk about the battles of St. Leonard's Creek, the first and second battle, because Don Shomette's going to cover that more than adequately following me. I'm going to talk a little bit about battles toward the end, because Southern Maryland is very fortunate that it has two of what I regard as 7 battles that took place in the state of Maryland. Historic route. I already mentioned about the British invasion route. Whenever you mention Benedict and the War of 1812, almost everybody immediately understands that yes, that is where the British began their invasion of America. Where they eventually went to Bladensburg, they defeated the Americans in probably the low point of the entire war, and then marched on to Washington, D.C. and occupied our capital. And the map that you see on the right shows the route of the British going up through Nottingham, up through Upper Marlborough, to Bladensburg and on to Washington. But what hardly anybody realizes, that Benedict, long before it was the landing place for the British invasion, was also the site of a British raid on June 21st, 1814, that resulted in a skirmish, where at least one British sergeant was killed and one American was killed. It was also the site of a raid where the British came ashore and there was no opposition whatsoever. And the British reported that the Americans had left so suddenly that they left behind many of their muskets and their equipage from the local militia. This is an engineer's drawing of Benedict that was done in 1814. And if you look at the red rectangles, those represent the British positions. And I think you can make out where Benedict is located right in through here. This is the road that heads toward Hughesville, which is 231 if you're familiar with that area. We're going to go right over there this afternoon. But by looking at this particular sketch, you can see the actual position where the British were located. And what's fascinating about it is that it shows them on top of the heights. And this is a bit of a confusion because many reports state that the actual encampment was below the heights, between Benedict and the heights. This particular depiction shows them on the very top of the heights. Reenactments. I thought you might get a chuckle out of this. This is the Charles County Tercentenary celebration that took place on August 17th, 1958, 2 days before the actual event of the British landing, which would have been August the 19th, but this was on the weekend. And you can see in the bottom photograph in here, you have lifeboats, probably from the Mary Lumberg School of Seamanship, that were borrowed so that they could do this reenactment. And you can see people out here in the bleachers watching the reenactment of the British landing. What I find even more fascinating is the photograph over here. Here the British are dressed as they would have been in the Revolutionary War, not during the War of 1812. You also may notice in the background women with brooms, shovels, and rakes attempting to keep the British from landing. This is not a very historically accurate reenactment of what really took place there. And I hope that if it's ever done again in the future, they will attempt to be more accurate. But here is one that is much more accurate, and this is the Grand Tactical that took place at Jefferson Patterson Park Museum where we were going for lunch. And this took place just this past September 20th and the 21st. And I'm just curious, how many people here were at the Grand Tactical, just a show of hands? It was to me the greatest event that Southern Maryland has ever held related to the War of 1812. And unfortunately, they only had about 3,000 to 4,000 people show up for that event. This was the largest reenactment in North America in the year 2008, and it took place right here